Hello and welcome. My name's Simon Zucchi, and this is the on-demand training for our 101 Quick Start for Houses of Multiple Occupation, otherwise known as HMOs. What are you going to learn on this training? Well, you're going to learn what you need to know to get started with this highly profitable strategy. I'm going to help you overcome the fear of making expensive mistakes and have the confidence also to move forward with this strategy. I want to clear up some of the myths around HMOs, and I want you to understand which HMO strategy is best for you, because there are a number of different ways in which you can do HMOs, and we're going to cover those in the training today. And I'm going to give you a clear action plan of what to do next to move forward, things you need to do to move you forward in your property investing journey. So we're going to cover a lot over the next 2 hours. So how do you make the most of this training? Well, I would go through this video training in one setting. It's 2 hours long. I'll go through it in one go if I were you. Use the PDF notes document that's attached. Fill in the blanks and write extra notes as well. There might be extra things I say that are not actually in the notes. You want to jot those down. Make an action list of things you need to do after the training, and then commit to your own success. Go and take action. Do the things on your action list, because only by implementing what you learn are you going to be really successful. And then also you can go back and review this on-demand video as often as you need. So that's how to get the most out of the training today. I just want to mention here, if you want to learn more about this strategy, I recommend you invest in my Ultimate HMO Home Study Program. Now, enrollment for this is currently closed, so you cannot join now. However, we open up every so often, and so if you want to get on the notification list for when we do open it, you can do that, and I'll give you a link at the end of this training to do it. Now, just so you know, most of the training from this particular 101 Quick Start to HMO on-demand training is actually for module 1 of 6 modules in the Ultimate HMO study. Okay, and module 1 is very much an introduction to HMOs, which is what this training is tonight, to give you an overview and enough for you to start moving forward. So who am I and how can I help you? I think whenever you're training with someone, it's important to understand who they are and what they've done to make sure they know what they're doing. And I started investing in property back in 1995. I bought a house I lived in with some of my friends when I started work at Cadbury's in Birmingham as a graduate trainee. Now, I actually became a student landlord in 1998 by accident. You see, I wanted to move slightly closer to work, to Cadbury's, and I recognized the value of holding property, so I actually moved out of my first home, and rather than selling it, I held on to it to rent out. And I moved into my second house with my friends, which was a bit close to Cadbury's, and I kept the first house and I rented it to students, because it was just next to Birmingham University where I'd been a student myself. And that was back in 1998. So I've been a student landlord, an HMO landlord for a very, very long time. As I said, this particular property was a bit by accident. I bought some other properties, the single lets, I did some property flips. I was fortunate enough to actually be able to replace the income from my job at Cadbury's, and I left that in 2001. And then by 2003, I'd pretty much replaced my income that I earned previously at Cadbury's. And so it took me 8 years. And I did it very much on my own, but I did okay, but I made lots of mistakes, and I thought, wouldn't it be good to learn from other people? And I looked around, and there were no kind of ways of connecting, no network meetings for property investors. There were lots these days, but there were none then. So I started the very first networking in the UK for property investors in Birmingham, called the Property Investors Network. That was back in 2003. And now there are 50 plus meetings all over the country, the Property Investors Network, every month. And it's a great place to go and learn and connect with other investors and find people who might have deals, who might have money. You should definitely go and check it out. And then I looked back at all my properties, and I realized that my student HMO had been by far the most profitable and actually the less hassle as well. And so I became a deliberate HMO landlord in 2005. I bought a house, a 3-bedroom house, converted it into a 5-bed HMO, and then started buying a lot more HMOs because I realized such a powerful strategy it was. And I've shared this strategy. I've taught thousands and thousands of people who've successfully implemented it to replace their income. So I do know a huge amount about HMOs, and I'll convey as much of that knowledge to you as I can in this training session. I'm also the author of a #1 best-selling book on Amazon called Property Magic. It came out in 2008. It's really important, I believe, to keep up to date with your property knowledge. So it's currently in its 6th edition. It's still a bestseller, and it's also now currently available on audio as well. If you prefer, you can listen to it via Audible. So I just want to give you a little bit about me, a bit of credibility. I don't claim to know it all. I'm not an expert in everything. There's certain things that I know a lot about because I've done a lot of them. I've helped a lot of people do them. And this topic, HMOs, is one of those topics. So I want to give you a little introduction to HMOs. In a minute, I'm going to tell you what HMOs are. But first of all, I want to get you thinking about why you should be investing in HMOs. Well, first of all, there is a high demand for this type of accommodation all over the countries. HMOs work everywhere. Now, there is an oversupply in some places, and I'll talk about that later. But suffice to say, there's a high demand because you are providing affordable accommodation for people who can't afford to buy their own home and who maybe don't really want to live on their own in a studio or an apartment. And so you're providing, I believe, a very good service to society, and obviously you're getting rewarded for that. You see, right now there is a real problem. There's a UK housing crisis, and by having an HMO, you're providing a home to 4, 5, 6 people, maybe more, within one property. So it really is helping out, and we get rewarded financially for that. In fact, I'd go as far as saying I believe it is the most profitable and stable investment strategy in the UK. You can also make it a passive income. There is a myth that HMOs are lots of work, and I'm going to talk about that later, but actually you don't have to do the work. Now, you do have to buy the property in the first place. In fact, you don't even have to buy it. You can get an option or rent to rent. We'll talk about that later. But, you do need to do some work up front. But once you've got the property, you can get someone else to look after it for you. You can give it to a letting agent. There aren't many that actually understand HMOs. There are more and more specialists now, but most normal letting agents don't get it. You can give it to a charity, to a company. In fact, I don't manage any of mine. Other people do that for me. So you can make it a passive income once you've done the initial work. I believe it's the fastest way to replace your income with property. It took me 8 years to replace my income. One of my students, a guy called Greg, who also was at Cadbury's at the same time as me, he started a year before me actually. He stayed there 20 years and he got to the point where he took redundancy, and his final salary was a lot higher than my final salary because he'd been there so much longer. And he came and did some training with me, and in 8 months, he had replaced his income. Now, it took me 8 years. He did it in 8 months. So when you know how, you've got the right knowledge, support, and environment around you, it can be done very, very quickly. In fact, most people need probably less than 5 HMOs to replace their income. So you don't need lots and lots of properties. If you get the right kind of property, 5 is all you need. And in this training, I'll explain how you can work out how many you need to replace your income and how you go about doing that. So I want to inspire you what HMOs can do, because whenever you hear about something new, it can seem quite daunting and overwhelming. And I want to encourage you to persevere. I want to encourage you to educate yourself to understand just what HMOs could achieve for you. So here are some of my students who've been particularly successful in HMOs, and they were from all around the country, and I'll demonstrate this works absolutely anywhere. So Stuart Scott, based in Brighton, a design background, and he really specializes in co-living, so really making these places very cool and trendy. He was already successfully investing, but he came on my program and got an extra £135,000 of profit. This is not rental income. This is profit after mortgages, after management fees, after bills and everything, £135,000 a year. Bronwyn and John down in Southampton, both working full-time in the city, an extra £80,000 income. And they were traveling back to and from the city every day and still were able to do this. Rick and Lorraine Gannon. Rick was a former policeman, came into training me, had no property experience prior to that, really got good at HMOs, made £121,000 of extra income. This is all in just 12 months. Tim Purcell, he was a doctor down in Bristol doing property very much part-time, had no experience, and he made £174,000 now every year recurring from his property investing. Aga and Seb, originally from Poland, they didn't have enough money to buy any properties. They were using rent to rent, which I'm going to talk about later. And in their first year, £74,000 residual income was the profit they made. Carly and Kirsten, originally from Scotland, also down in Brighton, they didn't have any money or any experience. So we taught them how to find great deals. They went and joint ventured with other people. So other people put the money in, and their share of the income, £62,000. They only get half of it. So it was, £120,000 or so. They get half of it, which is £62,000. Jonathan, really young, used to be full-time in property, working for a property sourcing company, thought he knew about property, had a couple of buy-to-lets, came on our program, focused on HMOs, and they got £120,000 income in his first year. And finally, Anthony and Jackie Edwards from Oxford. Jackie's become a real expert in her own right in rent-to-rent, and she learned it from me, and she now makes £70,000 income. So I hope I'm just inspiring you about just how life-changing this strategy can be by getting very profitable properties. I'll show you exactly how much you can make by doing these properties. So let's go back to the basics. After all, this is 101 training. What is an HMO? So an HMO, house of multiple occupation. An HMO is a house occupied by 3 or more qualifying persons, i.e. being persons who are not all the same family. Okay, and with an HMO, you, the landlord, will generally pay the bills. A normal single-let property, the tenant pays a bill, but you pay the bills, and you make a much, much higher income than with single-let properties. Now, it's important to say here that not all HMOs are the same. The UK government sets out the HMO guidelines, and the local councils apply them and have their own kind of interpretation. So you do need to check with your local council. And actually it varies in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on what the local councils interpret, basically. So it is really, really important. Whatever you want to operate HMOs, you need to specifically check with that local council. And I've heard about people who've got HMOs in London and they know the rules with one particular borough, and they get a property not too far away, but it happens to be in another borough, and they've got a different interpretation. So it's really important you check with the local council. Now, HMOs are typically 4 to 6 people is a normal HMO, and it's very much considered a residential property. Whereas larger HMOs might have 7 or more people, and they're kind of considered a commercial property. Let me talk a little bit about differences between single-lets and also HMOs. So a single-let property, which is what most landlords have, by the way, you have one contract, what's called one AST contract in place. So the tenants you might have a family living there, or maybe a single person or a couple, whatever, but it's very much just one contract they have. Now, usually the tenant will pay all of the bills, and that means the gas, the electric, the council tax. The only thing the landlord really pays is the mortgage, the insurance, and if it's a leasehold property, they'll pay the ground rent and the service charges. But suffice to say, the tenant pays most of the bills. Now, a normal single-let property might be furnished or unfurnished, really depends on the demand in the local area, and usually you get a little bit more money if it's furnished. Some people don't want to furnish property, they want to bring all their own stuff into the house and live there and make it their own home. And a typical return you get from a single-let might be between 5 and 7% return on investment, okay? Now, it's important to understand that if you're in London, the return might be only 2 or 3% because the house prices are so high. Okay, so let's compare a single-let now with an HMO. So an HMO, you'll have multiple tenants, and each tenant has their own AST, assured short-term tenancy contract. And the landlord usually pays all the bills. Now, I say usually, not always, there are a few exceptions we'll mention later, but imagine that you have an HMO, you should expect you're probably going to be paying all of the bills. Okay, we'll talk about how to calculate what that might be later on. HMOs are usually furnished. In each of the bedrooms, you're going to provide, obviously, a bed, a chest of drawers, a wardrobe. If it's a student accommodation, a desk and a chair. Others, you probably don't need to do that. And then you're going to have a living room with a TV and a faux leather settee and all those kind of things, and a fully furnished kitchen as well. But the returns you get, the return on investment, should be 15% plus. So the return you can make is much, much higher. And a lot of people say, well, maybe I should start with a single let because it's easier and do that, then I'll go on to an HMO. And yes, you could do that. But my view is, well, if you're going to make so much more money from an HMO, why on earth would you bother doing a single let? It's about educating yourself and making sure you understand how to do HMOs correctly. That's really, really important. So often one of the myths people have is, well, are HMOs more work? Are they lots more work? So let's look at that. And obviously the tenants you have in an HMO can kind of be transitory. You know, they might come there for 6 months, they might move on, live with some other people or whatever it might be. So that is certainly true. And there's more turn of tenants than you might have in a single let property. And because you've got actual more tenants to manage in a single let, I would agree, yes, a single let might be seen as more, an HMO might be seen as more work than a multi-let. However, you earn a lot more monthly profit. And what that means is there's obviously extra money there to be able to afford to pay someone else to look after it. I don't manage my HMOs. You know, I've had HMOs for a very long time. I have no idea who the tenants are. I've never met them. I never get calls from them. I never will meet them. Someone else does that for me. And because I've got such a high cash flow, I can afford to pay someone else to do that for me. And so can you. So let's talk about how much you can actually make. Well, rental income you get will depend on several factors. So the location of the property is very important. And with all property investing, location is absolutely critical. You've got to look at the local supply and demand. And ideally, you want more demand than there is supply. Now, this is a very important point I'm going to make here. And very often people say, well, hang on a minute. Aren't there lots of HMOs all over the place? And yes, there are lots of HMOs because it's a very popular strategy, because it's such a profitable strategy. And in some areas, I believe there is an oversupply. So let me be very clear on that. In some areas, there are too many HMOs. However, the HMOs that are unlet, the ones that are empty, are generally the ones that are in not such good condition, or they're very average. You see, the condition and appearance of the property is very, very important. We encourage our students to go very high end, to make them look fantastic, make the rooms look like a hotel room, and then you should very quickly fill your rooms. You see, if the condition of your room and the house is better than the average on the market, and it's not that much more expensive, you should quickly fill your rooms. So just be aware, in some areas there is an oversupply. The size of the rooms is important as well. Now, in a house, one of the secrets of an HMO is you kind of want to maximize the number of rooms in the property. However, if you put too many rooms in and the rooms are too small, no one's going to want to live in a box. They don't want to live in a room if it's too small. And in fact, there are some minimum room sizes you need to adhere to. So for a single room, the minimum size, you might want to write this down, the minimum room size for a single room is 6.51 square meters. That's 6.51 square meters. So a room must be that size as a minimum, otherwise you can't rent it out as a bedroom. If you have a double bedroom, it needs to be 10.2 square meters. Those are the new national guidelines for room sizes. So, you know, by all means, if you have a really, really big room, you could split it and make 2 rooms, but make sure they're not too small, otherwise they will be hard to rent. Also, depending if you have shared bathrooms, very often in these house shares and HMOs, you have several people sharing a bathroom. You don't want to make too many people share, because if you have more than 3 people sharing a bathroom, they're going to think, well, hang on a minute, how long is it going to take in the morning for me to get ready for work, etc. So it's very popular in HMOs to have what's called an ensuite. So that is basically an attachment to the room in the corner of the room that is a separate room in itself, if you like, that has that has a shower, a hand basin, and a toilet. So they don't have to be very big, but they need to be big enough to fit those into. So what that means is the person who lives in that room has their own private ensuite facilities. And obviously you can get more rent for those. You should look at the demand in the area. In some areas, you'll find pretty much all the rooms are ensuite. Many areas, you have people sharing bathrooms. Most of my houses, I have a mix of the two. I have some of the larger rooms are ensuite, some of the small rooms where there's not enough room to put an ensuite in. You have a few people sharing a bathroom. And most people are kind of happy with that. You also got to think about the communal facilities. So obviously people will share a kitchen. In some HMOs, they have cooking facilities in each of the rooms. I don't like that because it feels a bit like what they used to call a bed sit, a studio. I like to have a nice, decent kitchen for people so they can kind of, sometimes you have a really good community. They might even cook together, which is fantastic. Everyone needs good double cupboard space. You need lots of countertop space, and you might have a large kitchen diner. In most of my HMOs, I have a communal room as well, where they have some nice fake leather settees and a nice flat screen TV, and people want to sit around and watch TV together. So those are the communal areas they have, and that will affect the rental income you can achieve. Now, most landlords compete on price. If they see lots of other properties in the area, they just kind of drop their price a little bit to try and be a bit cheaper. But I don't think that's a good idea. In fact, if you have a lower price, generally you'll attract not such good tenants. And what a lot of our students do is, if there's lots of competition, they actually put the price up a little bit, because on all the websites where tenants can search for rooms, they often have price categories. And if you go up a little bit, you might slip into the next price category, and there may not be that much competition there. So if someone is looking for a better room, they're prepared to pay a bit more money. If you appear in those searches, it's more likely you'll rent your room. Now, obviously, your room needs to match up to the price you're paying, but it can be really, really good. As I said, in a good area, which has got good facilities, there's always demand for good rooms. So you want to make sure you have high quality rooms. The average room, and you can go onto a website like spareroom.co.uk, which is the website on which most landlords advertise and most tenants look. It's spareroom.co.uk. If you look at the pictures, you'll see most houses are very average, all painted magnolia. You've got very boring looking rooms. You want to make your rooms look like a hotel room, and you should have no problem filling them. And obviously you get a higher rent and you have lower voids if you have a higher quality room as well. Now, here's a rule of thumb you want to write down when trying to work out what the rent should be and how much you can charge. Obviously, you can look to see what your competitors are charging in the area, but remember, you want the room rent to be less than it would be if someone was living in a studio, plus they had to pay their own bills. So if you live on your own in a studio, you've got to pay your own council tax, your gas, electric, TV license, broadband, internet. It's going to be at least £200, maybe even £300, depending on council tax. So that's the bills alone, plus what it costs to hire the studio. So for someone to live in a little studio apartment on their own, and the studio is where you have the living room and bedroom in the same room, and you might have an ensuite attached. You might have kitchen facilities in the same room, or you might have a separate little room for kitchen, but it's not a lot of space. It's not great to live in a studio, but work out what it is in your area. Go online, find some studios, whatever that is, add on £200-300, and really you need to be less than that. Okay, so it's a really good guide of how you can price your rooms. The great thing about HMOs, after taking off the mortgage, the insurance, the management fees, and all of the bills, the minimum profit you should make, profit, is £500 per month. An average profit for a good 6-bedroom HMO should be about £1,000 profit after all expenses. And if you have larger HMOs, 8 beds, 9 beds, that kind of thing, you could be making a couple of £1,000, £2,000 profit. I'll give you some case studies, an example of those later, just to stimulate your thinking and show how actually you don't need many properties to replace your income. So let's talk about that now. And I think it's important for you to set a plan to understand what you need to do. So I believe that owning a property is a bit like owning a cash machine. If you get it right and you educate yourself, you do your due diligence, go out there and find the right kind of properties, the idea is that when you bring rent in each month and take off all the bills and expenses, there's some profit left over every single month, and that's your profit. Now, of course, you have to pay tax on your profit, just like if you make money in a business, you have to pay tax. If you have a job, you have to pay tax. So property is no different. However, recently, we've seen a change in the way property investors are taxed the last couple of years. And so actually there are many landlords that are looking to retire early because it's not as good for them as it was when they first started. We'll talk more about that later on, because that's why now is such a good opportunity for you to be using this really powerful strategy. So at the end of the month, you get profit from each of these properties, okay? And you do need to pay tax on the profit. Obviously, you do need to pay tax, and that's really important to understand. But as I said, when you make money, you have to pay tax. There are ways of minimizing tax as well. Now, let's say that you're going to make £1,000 profit per month before tax, okay? So let's say each HMO you get makes £1,000 profit. So my question to you is, I want you to think about this, I want you to write an answer down, is how many of these would you need to replace your current income? So let's say you earn £3,000 a month before tax, you'd obviously need 3 HMOs, okay? That's kind of quite simple, really. Now, when people first take on properties, they probably like to manage them themselves for a couple of reasons. First of all, you think, well, I could probably do a better job than a letting agent. And also, I don't really want to pay 10% of the income to a letting agent. I'm trying to make money to replace my job. And this is what I certainly did when I first started. And, you know, it doesn't take a lot of effort, a lot of time to manage a few HMOs if you've got some good systems in place. However, the more properties you get, the more time it will take, and actually it slows down your acquisition rate. So I would suggest you get the first 3, 4, 5, or whatever it is to replace your income. And then the next 1 or 2 after that, you use the income you make from those extra ones to pay someone else to manage the property for you. What that means is you first replace your income, but you're spending some time managing, then you get a couple of extra that frees up your time. So not only do you replace your income, you have all the time you want to do whatever you want with your life. So think about that. How many extra would you need to replace your time? And imagine that for a moment. Just imagine you had enough properties that the income was coming in every month, so you didn't have to work, you didn't have to spend time managing your properties. How would that feel? I imagine that would be pretty life-changing for you. So I'd like you to set yourself a goal. I'd like to put a stake in the ground and decide how many HMOs do you want to acquire. And also think about when do you need them by. Now, for some people, maybe the answer might be, well, tomorrow. I want to replace my income tomorrow. Well, that's maybe a little bit unrealistic. But if you wanted 3, 4, 5, could you do that in a year? Well, absolutely. You could absolutely do that in a year if you wanted. And you might say, hey, you know, I just want to buy 1 HMO a year for the next 4 or 5 years, and then I'm done. I've got enough for my pension or my future. Well, it's entirely up to you. But I like to put a stake in the ground and write down, I'm a great believer in setting yourself goals, how many properties you want, and when do you want them by. And then you can work out how many months is it to get each one. So let's say you decide that you want 3 HMOs by the end of 12 months. So this time next year, you want to have 3 HMOs, and that'll be enough to get you out of your job. So 3 HMOs in 12 months means you're going to need to get 1 HMO every 4 months. And if you look at it thinking, okay, what do I need to do just to get the next one, and focus on that, then it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming. And actually 1 property in 4 months is very, very achievable. So think about what you need to do to actually get to that point and set yourself a plan, start taking action. And once you've got that first one, you say, okay, what do I need to do to get the next one? And by the way, the first one will always take more time. It will always be more stressful. You have more fear about that. But once you've done this once, you'll realize that actually you can do it again and again. And you might get one, set up a cookie cutter, so you buy one and just get another one, then another one and another one, until you have all the properties you need. So I really encourage you to write that down right now, set yourself a goal, and then you can work out a plan to actually achieve that and to achieve the goal you want to achieve. It's really important to stake in the ground and say what you want to do. Okay, so let me give you a bit more information about who lives in HMOs, and also, well, why do people live in HMOs? Well, as I've mentioned before, an HMO is very affordable housing. It's much cheaper than someone living on their own in a studio or in a one-bedroom apartment. And also, some people like living with other people. I'm like that. You know, when I finished university, I got my job at Cadbury's. I could have, I suppose, bought somewhere, lived on my own, but I didn't want to do that. I'm quite a social person. I like living with other people. It's a bit of company. It's some people to cook with, that kind of thing. And it's a bit of an instant social life, especially if they move to a new city for work, they don't know anyone. If they go and live on their own, well, they're only going to get to meet people slowly at work. Whereas if they live in a house with people, they've got some instant new friends. People they go to the pub with, they can sit and watch TV with at night, whatever. And it's great if people are moving to a new city. So there are 4 basic types of tenants who live in HMOs. And what I want to do is talk through each of those tenant types so you can work out which one resonates with you the most. So the first group of tenants you get in HMOs are students. So these are full-time students studying at university, and they've probably come away from where they live, gone to one of the big university cities, and they're there for 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. Now, in the first year, most students go and live in university accommodation. So the university might have blocks of flats, or they might have halls of residence, and they usually have enough accommodation for all of the first years to attend. However, some universities don't quite have enough accommodation, and if someone comes to university very late, for example, if they didn't quite get their A-level results, and they have to then apply to what's called clearing to try and get a place in a university that's got some space and might be a bit more flexible on the grades, well, they apply, and maybe it's August, September time when they're looking for accommodation, okay? You do get some people who, in their very first year, might go into an HMO because they didn't get into the university accommodation. But most people, first year, go into university accommodation. Then after that, they tend to move out. Now, in many universities, you will notice there's just lots of purpose-built new student blocks. Sometimes they're university owned, very often they're private companies who recognize the value of renting to students, and they build these nice big blocks, and living in them is very, very expensive. And some students like them because they're nice and new and flash, but a lot of students like to live in a traditional HMO house because they get the independence of living in a house with their friends. If you live in one of these big blocks, it really does feel like university accommodation. You can't have parties like you might want to, and believe me, students will have parties in your house. That's kind of part of that's what happens really. And they want a bit more independence, and it's more cost effective for them to live in a house than it is in these purpose-built blocks. Now, the great thing about students is often they come as a group of friends. So that's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, students, when they come as a group of friends, usually pay their own bills. Now, you might remember what I said. In most HMOs, the landlord normally pays all the bills. But when a group of students come, depending on the university location, very often they will pay their own bills. And as they're a group of friends, they might set up a bank account together and they'll pay the bills from that, and they sort it out quite easily. A note here to mention is that students, no matter who pays the bills, you or the students, they're exempt from council tax if they're full-time students. So sometimes a mistake landlords make is they look at how much they can get from a student in rent and how much they can get from another type of tenant, and they forget that the students are probably going to pay their own bills and don't have to pay council tax. And although the rent might be slightly less, actually you can make more money sometimes renting to students. Now, it's very, very important with students that the property is very close to the university campus. Students are, unfortunately, what's the word I'm looking for? Lazy. Lazy is the word. Because of that, what it means is they want to be able to roll out of bed at 5 to 9 and get into their campus at 9 o'clock in time for their first lecture. Oh, no, sorry. What I mean is they want to be able to roll out of bed at 5 to 11 and get into campus for their first lecture at 11 o'clock. And so proximity is really, really important. I met a landlord once who was saying he had a great student property. He was really excited, and it was only 2 bus rides away from the university. No student is going to take 2 bus rides to get to university. There's going to be a lot more accommodation really close to the campus that they could use. Now, sometimes students might actually stay there for 2 or even more years. They move out in the first year, they're there in the second, third year. If they're doing something like medicine or veterinary, they might be there for even longer. So the great thing is you can have a group of tenants and no void periods for a very long time. Now, it's very important to understand the academic year for students. The academic year runs from the end of September, beginning of October, through to the end of May, beginning of June, okay? And a mistake many people make is they think, right, I'm going to get a house ready for August, September, ready for the new students moving in. The thing is, they often move in July because they will have moved out of their last accommodation at the end of June. So most student tenants will have already found their accommodation. In fact, they often do it at the beginning of the second term, so in January for that coming July. So if you think you're going to get a house in September and rent it out to students, you might have missed the vast majority of students who have already found their accommodation. So here's what you need to do. You want to try and get your property, get it ready for January, show it to the students, and then you could do short-term lets to other people until the students move into July, and then you're in the academic cycle. I'm not saying you can't get tenants in September. As I said, there are some people who maybe they're late coming to university and their first years, they need somewhere to live. You've got people who might have been in a group of friends and they fell out with their friends, or some of their friends failed their exams, so the house they were going to live in, they're not going to live in anymore, and they're now looking for somewhere to live. So you can find tenants, and in many places there's an oversupply, there's empty student houses, often because of these new purpose-built blocks. But actually, it's the houses that are in not such good condition, or the ones that are further away from the university, those are the ones that are often empty. If you've got a good accommodation close to university, it should be very easy to rent that. And the other interesting thing about students, unlike other HMO tenants, they often sign one contract. So you get all of the tenants to sign one contract for which they're all jointly liable for that contract. What that means is if there's a group of 5 of them and one of them falls out because they failed their exams, it's down to the other 4 to find a friend to come in and replace that person. So that could be great for you. It makes it much easier. You don't have to worry about things. Also, you can get the parents to be the guarantor. What a guarantor is, it means if the tenant doesn't pay the rent, you can pursue the guarantor to pay the rent for them. They sign up, say, yeah, I'm prepared to be a guarantor. And you want it to be someone who's got a property ideally, because if they don't pay the rent, this is the guarantor, you could take them to court and then get a CCJ, a county court judgment against them. That's not a good thing to have. So based on that, most people will pay the rent. The experience I have, if you've got tenants, very often it's the parents who are actually paying anyway. You see, when it comes into your bank account, it's come from Mr. and Mrs. Smith. But even if Johnny Smith is paying and Johnny can't pay the rent 1 month because he spent too much money on beer, you call up Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and sure enough, the money's in your account that afternoon, and they give Johnny a bit of an ear bashing for spending his rent money on beer. So, I obviously love students. They are going to have parties in your house, but you take damage deposits, and they cause damage. They're supposed to fix things, and it's just a great type of tenant to have. Now, an action for you if you think you want to rent to students, or you want to check into it, do a bit more research. Each university will have a university accommodation office. They're really useful people to know because they can tell you exactly about the term times. They can tell you about the supply and demand of accommodation. They give you an idea of which areas the students like to live in, because there'll be certain areas around the university they want to live. And really useful to get hold of them. You might even be able to advertise your property in the accommodation office. Now, another thing to be aware of, and the accommodation office will be able to tell you about this, in some university cities, there is a reduced rent over the summer holiday. In fact, some places you only get 10 months of rental income. and you don't get any rent over the 2 summer months. In some places, there's a half rent, and in my student house in Birmingham, where I've got students, they pay rent all the year through. So it does vary from place to place. So you need to check that out. If you've got somewhere where actually there's no rental income in the summer, what a lot of landlords do is, because the students aren't there, they don't pay rent then, they actually do very short-term lets. And if you've got accommodation in a city that's popular in the summer with tourists, for example, you can make a lot of money doing very short-term lets just for that kind of July and August period when maybe the tenants aren't paying you any rent, okay? So students is the first type of tenant, one of my favorite types. The next type of tenant is what we call young professionals. So these are people who are working professions such as doctors, solicitors, accountants, architects, engineers. They've generally been to university, and that means they've actually lived in a shared house when they were a student. So that's good because they understand what it's like to live in a shared house. They understand the dynamics, and actually they often quite want to live in a shared house because they're familiar with that. That's what they did when they were at university. And they may not necessarily know each other before they move in. Sometimes you might get 2 friends who come to a city and they want to live together, so they get into a house share. But unlike students, who often come as a group of people, you might get random people who come together, they don't know each other, and you want to try and make sure there's a bit of a fix. I try and make sure the ages are kind of similar, so they kind of get on with each other, really. And these people are obviously out to work all day, and often they're out at night as well. They're out doing activities, they're meeting their friends, they're out doing stuff, and they're hardly ever at the house. Now, they might move after 6 months. Someone might come to start a new job. They live in the house, and maybe they don't quite get on with their housemates, or maybe the location's not quite right for their job, and they move because of that. But I've had tenants, young professionals, who've stayed in their room in my HMO for years and years and years. And so most of my HMO properties are actually for this type of tenant. In a really good house, they become a really good community. You know, sometimes they'll cook together, and they'll watch films together, and it's just amazing. And people, because they feel in the community, they don't really want to leave that. And the only reason they leave is maybe they change jobs, or maybe they move in with a partner or something like that. So a good young professional house is just absolutely incredible. The next group of tenants, similar to professional tenants, young professionals, are just people who are working. And the only difference is maybe they've not been to university. Maybe they've lived at home with mum or dad. Now, nothing wrong with that. And, you know, just because they've not been to university doesn't mean they're clever. They might have just preferred to go down that route and start working straight away. But the important significance here is that because they've maybe not lived in a shared house before, they may not know the etiquette. They may not know exactly what's involved living in a shared house. Things like, you know, if you're the last one to go out, make sure the windows and doors are locked, and you know, don't come in late playing music because other people are going to have to get up and go to work. And they sometimes just need a little bit of coaching and show them the house rules of what it's like to live in a shared house. And again, they may stay for many, many years. Now, on this note, by the way, you can mix working people and young professionals living together. That's no problem at all. I wouldn't mix students in with working people, and I wouldn't mix this next group of tenants in with working people either. So the final and fourth group of tenants you get in houses of multiple occupation are people who are on local housing authority benefits. They're people who don't work or can't work for whatever reason, and so they get benefit from the council. Now, this is good because it means at least there's a reliable income coming in. If someone loses their job and they're working, they can't afford to pay the rent, and they can get onto benefits, but it might take a while for that to happen. If someone's already on benefits, you know the council is going to pay for them. And there's a myth that you can't get paid direct. That's incorrect. You can go to the council, sit down with them, with the tenant, fill in a form, and you can get the rent paid direct to you. Now, the tenant can at any time go back and request it's paid to them, so you need to stay on top of that, but you can get council rent coming direct to you. And generally, the people who are on benefits, they don't tend to mix with each other. You know, they like to keep themselves to themselves. They might get a little fridge for their room. They don't want to put their food in the fridge because they don't trust other people. They think someone might nick their milk or their sausages. So you don't really get the same community. And they are a lot more work. You know, sometimes some of the people might be a bit vulnerable. They might not be very good with their money. They might have problems, addictions and things. And so it's a lot more work, it's a lot more hassle. So I personally do not have any HMOs that have local housing authority tenants. I do have single let properties that have got LHA people in, and they're no problem at all. They're great tenants, in fact. But in HMOs, I don't do it because it is a lot more work. You do need to be aware of that. And because there's some vulnerable people there, they really do need a bit more support. It's a lot more time and effort. If you wanted a letting agent to look after your property for you, they probably would not do local housing authority. Okay, if you find these, there are specialist HMO letting agents. They generally just work with students or young professionals and working people. They generally don't work with local housing authority people because they are definitely more work. So that's why I don't have this type of tenant in my HMOs. Now, there is something you can do, which is renting to local charities. And these are local charities who provide housing to people, often to vulnerable people who really need help. And they might be people who are struggling with addiction, they're recovering, or they're just coming out of prison and things like that. And they need a bit of help, really. And the idea is you rent your HMO to the charity and they manage it for you. Now, this can be really good because it means that you're actually helping support these vulnerable people, providing accommodation for them, but you don't have the hassle, you don't have the work and the effort to do it. The charity specialise in doing this. They get paid very high rates from the local council. So what that means is they can almost pay you the full rent. And because they get so much more from the council, there's enough profit from them to operate this business. And sometimes they'll even pay all the bills as well. So you can sometimes make even more money renting to charities because you get the full rent and you don't even need to pay the bills. Now, obviously, different charities have different ways of operating, and some charities are better than others. So it's very important that you ask around, do your due diligence, get recommendations. So a great place to get recommendations, go to local network meetings, meet other investors, ask around who's renting to charities, or go to property training events. Again, ask around other people. You'll find other people who are doing this. Get word of mouth recommendations for them. You don't want to be working with a charity who's just starting to do this and you're their first property, because you don't want to be their guinea pig. So if you're going to do this, it's a great way of getting other people to manage for you. You're helping society, but just make sure you get the right charity. It's really important. So the question for you now is thinking about who should you rent to. We've got to think about how many HMOs you want and what time scale you need to get it in. So think about who do you want to rent to. And it will depend on the location of the property and also the local supply and demand. You know, it might be you're very close to a university, great, you can rent to students. If not, students are not really going to work for you. So always do your research, and you can actually test demand. You can go to websites like spareroom.co.uk and you can pay for an advert, put up a dummy advert to test what kind of response you get from potential tenants. I would also say pick a type of tenant for each property. Don't mix groups. So you might have one property that's a student HMO because it's very close to university, another one that's not quite close enough, so you put young professionals or working people into that one. But as I said, don't mix the tenant types. It generally doesn't work. You also need to think about, are you going to self-manage the property yourself, or are you going to find an agent or someone else to do it for you? So if you're going to self-manage, then probably it needs to be geographically close to where you live. But if you don't want to manage, ultimately, it doesn't matter where it is around the country. And so you could tap into, for example, the PIN network or other people who are buying properties elsewhere, get some local expertise. And as long as you have a local power team there to help you, it doesn't need to be exactly where you live. Okay, now let's talk about licensing and planning. These are, again, things that scare a lot of people off doing HMOs. There's a lot of urban myths around this. I want to debunk the myths and show you what you need to know to really be able to move forward with this strategy. So first of all, a question I get asked all the time is, does my HMO need a license? And the thing you need to understand is some HMOs need licensing and some don't. Just because it's an HMO, we've got 3 or more people living there, doesn't necessarily mean it needs a license. If required, if the property does need a license, it's the actual property that gets a license. So if you have 3 HMO properties, you would need 3 licenses. It's not you as a person that's licensed, it's each of the properties. Now the license holder can either be the owner of the property. If you buy the property, obviously that would probably be you, or it could be the manager. So if you use a strategy such as rent-to-rent or purchase lease options, which we'll talk about later in this training, you might get the HMO license as the manager of the property. Now, the general rule of thumb, if something needs a license or not, has changed. It used to be if you had 5 or more people living in the property and on 3 or more floors, then you would need to get a license. That's what it used to be. So if you hear people talking about 5 and 3, that's what they're talking about. And the reason I'm explaining that is because a lot of people don't know that the regulations have changed. So I just want to make it clear to you. In case you hear that, that's where it comes from. But different councils do have different interpretations. Even though the national guidelines were 5 people on 3 floors, some people would say, well, if it's 3 people on 3 floors, you need a license. So it's always important to check with your local council. Then some new legislation came in from the UK government in October 2018. And they said, basically, if a house has got 5 or more people, you need to have a license. So they got rid of the number of floors, and they said it's just about the number of people. And when you get an HMO license, it's actually licensed for a number of people. So it's not the number of bedrooms it has, it's the number of people who are licensed to stay in that property. But again, some councils say 3 or more people. So although most councils it's 5 or more, check with, and the specific department you need to speak to is you call the council and ask for the council HMO licensing department. They are the people who you need to speak to. So how much is a license? Well, it's supposed to be just the cost of administering it. However, some councils do use it to raise revenue. It's usually valid for 5 years, but some are 3 years, and I think some are even 1 year. And costs vary from as low as £550 for 5 years, so just over £100 a year, up to maybe £2,000. Now, you generally pay for the license in advance, and obviously you have to renew it whenever required. Some councils actually charge by the number of rooms, so that the number of people you're going to have on the license. So it's a bit hard to say exactly what the cost is. Again, it's one of those things where you have to check with your local council, the HMO licensing department, and they'll tell you exactly what it is in that particular area. So how do you apply for a license? Well, contact the local council and ask them to send you the HMO licensing pack. Some councils want you to do it online, but most will still send you a physical pack of documents. So there's quite a thick document pack that comes along. It might seem a little bit overwhelming at first, but if you just start to read through them, it talks about how do you manage the properties, etc. And it's pretty easy, and you can then kind of copy and paste on future forms once you've done it once. You might get someone to help you through the form the first time. You also submit, as well as filling in all the forms, you submit a floor plan for the property. Now, the floor plan, ideally draw it to scale. You can get software to do it these days, or I just used to use a piece of grid graph paper and try and do it to scale, so you show the size of the rooms and things. And then you show where the fire doors are, you show where the smoke detectors are, the heat detector, you show the emergency escape route, all these kind of things, the emergency lighting, and then you submit it to them. And what will happen is they will receive it, they'll send, by the way, you send it in along with the payment, obviously. Then they'll send you a confirmation of receipt. Now, it's very important you make sure you get your confirmation of receipt, because as soon as you put the application in, you can start using the property, using all the rooms. So you don't need to wait until your license is approved. It might take 2 months, it might take 6 months in some councils because they're overwhelmed. But you can start using the property as long as you put the application into them. So it's very important to understand that. And what will happen is they'll normally come out to the property, they'll do an inspection, they'll make sure everything is as you've said, it all looks okay. They'll send you a letter and they'll say, right, we're going to grant you a license subject to you doing this, and that. And obviously some things might be safety things you need to do, and some things might be slightly longer term things. You just get those things done, and then I'll send you the license. And then you need to display the license, a copy of it, in the property. It's a good idea to have a notice board as people first come in, and you'll have the license, you'll have the gas safety certificate there, you'll have the rules of the house, you'll have the emergency contact numbers, all the things you need just to make sure people aren't calling you all the time. The information is there for them. They can serve themselves, really. Now, I want to just touch on this, which are the HMO safety requirements. It is very, very important to make sure you provide safe accommodation for your tenants. And it's got to be safe, even if it doesn't require a license. So maybe you in an area where it's 5 or more people need a license, and you've got a property which has 4. In that case, it wouldn't need a license, but you still need to make sure you adhere to the safety requirements. And remember, these requirements do change over time. So again, speak to the local HMO licensing department, and they'll be able to tell you what they are. Very, very briefly, and it's a bit more extensive than this, but things like fire doors. So these are doors that are very thick, and they'll stop a fire going through them for at least 30 minutes. They have automatic door closers on them, so it shuts the door, which stops spread of fire. And they often have an intermittent strip around them, which expands when they get hot to stop smoke going around the property. You need to have an interlinked smoke alarm. What that means is you have a smoke detector in each room. So if a fire goes off in one room, the alarm goes off in all of the rooms so that everyone is alerted and get out of the property. You need to have emergency lighting where the exits are, the stairway as well. And you should have a 30-minute escape route. So what that means is if there's a fire, there's a way they can get out, usually down the main stairs that's kind of fireboarded, so that at least for half an hour, they should be able to get out without fire escaping and spreading and blocking their exit. You know, I believe you have a social, a moral, an ethical, and a legal requirement to make sure that you provide safe accommodation for your tenants. God forbid the worst happen, you would be liable for it. So you need to make sure you've done everything you can to keep it as safe as you can for your tenants. Now, on that note, I just want to mention something here. The National Landlord Association, NLA, run a landlord accreditation course. It's really good to understand your obligations as a landlord. Now, they're not specifically about HMOs, they're just about being a landlord generally, so it's valid for single-let and for HMOs. But they'll talk to you about the legislation. It's normally about £100 to go through a day, so it's a very, very low cost day. Not like the kind of events we do, very different, but still, it's a great day. You'll learn a lot about it. But here's the important thing. Once you are an accredited landlord, most councils will give you a discount off your HMO licenses. So it's normally at least £100 discount. So you've got 3 properties, you'd get a £300 discount, and the course more than pays for itself. So I'd highly recommend you put that on your action list and go and check out the NLA National Landlord Association Landlord Accreditation Day. Is a well worth doing. Now, we've talked about HMO licensing. Let's talk about planning. This is again something that people get very confused about, and they also mix up with licensing. Let me make it very clear that licensing and planning are totally separate matters. So forget everything I said about licensing for the moment. Let's just think just about planning. And planning is a complicated subject, but I just want to give you an overview and make it as simple as possible so you know what you need to do. Now, under permitted development, sometimes called PD, permitted development, you can take a normal house, a normal family home, a 3-bedroom house, let's say, and by the way, the planning classification for a normally family home is C3, and you can convert it into an HMO. The planning classification of that is C4 for up to 6 tenants. And what that means is you don't need to get planning permission because there's already this permitted development. So you can take a normal house, turn it into an HMO for up to 6 people. You do not need to get planning because of permitted development. However, this has changed in Article 4 areas where the permitted development rights have been removed. So I will explain in a few moments all about Article 4 and what it means for you, but just understand if it's an Article 4 area, it means instead of being able to do it without planning permission, you need to get planning permission. I'll cover more on that in a moment. Now, if you have a larger HMO for 7 or more tenants, you absolutely would need to apply for planning permission for a change of use to a planning criteria called classification called sui generis. Sui generis means in a class of its own. And what it means is, although people are living there as a residential property, it's not really a residential because it's a big HMO, 7 or more people. That's why it's called sui generis. So it's in a class of its own. So just to recap this, in most places, you can take a normal house, convert it into an HMO for up to 6 people and not get planning permission. You don't need it because of permitted development, unless Article 4 has been brought in where you would need to get planning permission. But if you have a larger HMO for 7 or more tenants, then you would need to get planning permission for a change of use, okay? So another thing to mention here is building regulations. Even if planning permission is not required, you will need building regs if you're moving around things in the property, such as water supply and drainage. So let's say you're taking a room and you're adding in an ensuite, so a little shower, hand basin and toilet. You'd need to get building regs for that. Let's say you were moving a kitchen from one room to another room, you'd need to get building regs for that. So if you're replacing like for like, let's say you've got a kitchen and you're just putting exactly the same kitchen, just a new one, new version of it, then you may not need building regs. So again, you need to speak to local council. There are private companies as well who can help you with this. You must get your building regs done to make sure things are done to the correct standard. So let me talk a little bit about Article 4. So Article 4 is where the local council have been given the power to remove the permitted development rights from C3 to C4. So they've removed the right to turn it from a normal family house into an HMO for up to 6 people. And the reason they've done this is because maybe there are too many HMOs in the area and they don't want any more HMOs. So rather than people being allowed to do it under permitted development, for you to be able to do it, you would need to apply for planning permission, and most councils will just automatically refuse the planning permission. Now, this has been selectively implemented around the UK since 2012. So the first places like Nottingham, for example, brought it in 2012. Some places brought it in 2015. Many places is not even in yet. So, and also it from city to city, it varies. So some cities, they've got it applied absolutely everywhere, which means it's very difficult for you to take a house, convert it into an HMO, because they're probably going to deny you planning permission to do it. Some cities have done it in selective areas. So where I live in Birmingham, they have applied Article 4, not everywhere, but in certain areas. And if you go to the council website, there'll often be a map. And if they have applied Article 4, it will show you exactly which areas are covered by it and which are not. And there are many cities that have not applied it at all because they're happy with HMOs and they want more HMOs because they recognise it's a great, affordable type of accommodation for people. So the lesson here, the moral here is check with your local planning department, not the licensing department, because remember, licensing and planning are different. So it's a local council planning department. So what does Article 4 mean for you? Well, you've got to be very careful if buying in an Article 4 area. You would need planning permission to turn from C3 to C4, so from a normal residential into an HMO. Most councils will immediately reject your application. Now, that doesn't mean you can't appeal. You can appeal, and if you meet all the planning criteria, you might actually get planning permission, but there's no guarantee. And so you wouldn't want to buy a house with the intention of turning it into an HMO only to find out it's Article 4 and you can't do it. Now, this is really important to understand. If you are buying an existing HMO, so a property that's already been set up and run as an HMO, you don't need to get planning permission because actually you can get what's called a certificate of lawfulness. As long as you can prove that it was set up as an HMO before Article 4 came into that area. Remember, it's different dates in different areas, and many areas it's not in yet. So as long as you can prove it was used as an HMO before Article 4 came in, and as long as you can prove it's been continuously used as an HMO, you can apply for a certificate of lawfulness and you do not need to get planning. So how do you prove it was used as an HMO? Well, you can get a copy of the contracts from the landlord. Hopefully they've kept those and show that there were multiple people living in the property continuously since before the HMO, before Article 4 came in which case you don't need to get planning. So there's a real opportunity right now because Section 24, which you may have heard about, is the new tax changes that came in, which means that we as property investors are taxed in a different way. And so what that means is that if you live in an area, if you own property in your own name, which most landlords do or did, and if you're a higher rate taxpayer, which most landlords are because they make lots of money from their property, it means you're going to pay more tax. So what this means is a lot of long-term landlords who've owned property for a very long time and their plan is to probably sell that property sometime in the future and retire, many of them are deciding to sell their properties early and retire and go and sit on a beach with a big pile of money. So this means that whereas prior to this coming in, it came in April 2017, and been phased in over 4 years to April 2020, what it means is that in Article 4 areas, prior to this, maybe landlords were sitting pretty thinking, well, I'm going to stay and hold my HMO because no more landlords can come into this area. There's really good supply of tenants, really good demand of tenants, and so therefore I'm going to hold on to this property. I'm not going to sell it. But now, because of Article 4, many of these landlords are thinking about selling. So right now, and probably for the next 12 months, there's going to be an opportunity for you to pick up landlords' properties already set up as HMOs in Article 4 areas, which you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So it's about seizing the opportunity now. It's a great time to be acquiring properties. And this is probably a one-off opportunity for the next 12 months or so as these landlords are starting to sell early. Now, there are a number of different HMO acquisition strategies you should use, and I want to run through these to help give you an idea of what might be the best ways of buying or controlling HMOs. And I want to raise your awareness to the different concepts. And obviously the strategy that you use will depend on your personal circumstances, depend on the time you have, depend on the money, resources you have, etc. So the easiest thing to do is to buy an existing HMO. And it's easy because it's already been set up, it's going to comply to the safety standards and everything. And as I said, there were always landlords looking to retire and cash in on their property portfolio. And there are even more of them now because of Section 24. And that will be the case for a limited period of time. And I run the Property Investor Network meetings. There are 50 all over the country, as I said, and I can tell you at a very grassroots level, we're seeing more and more landlords coming to our meetings who kind of are thinking about selling up early. So this is absolutely happening right now in the current market. Now, here's the thing about buying an existing HMO. Sometimes they need a little bit of cosmetic work. They need a little bit of a paint job, maybe carpets cleaning things, because sometimes the landlords have owned them for a while and have maybe not kept them in the best condition. Often they are not charging the full market rent. They might have, I've had properties where I've had a tenant in there for 4 or 5 years. I've pretty much kept the rent what it was when they first moved in. And over that time period, the rents have obviously gone up. So if you come in, this is an amazing opportunity for you because you can lift the value of the property by doing some cosmetic work. And also you can lift the rents as well. As tenants move out, the new tenant moves in, you charge a higher rent. So this is really good news for you buying. Couple of things to just be aware of. As I mentioned, in October 2018, new regulations came in about licensing. So it's now properties with 5 or more people need a license, but check with your local council. And there are also minimum room sizes. A single room minimum is 6.51 square meters. So there are some people who are selling properties now because maybe they didn't need to be licensed before, but they do need to be licensed now. Maybe they were on 2 floors, and remember, licensing before was about being on 3 floors, but they might need a license now. Maybe that's why they're selling. Or maybe some of the rooms are a little bit too small to rent out. So just be careful when buying existing HMOs to make sure it adheres to the current legislation. The next thing you can do is you can take a normal family house a C3 planning classification property and convert it into an HMO, subject to Article 4 and obviously subject to planning permission. So you might find a normal 3-bedroom house and turn it into a 5 or 6-bedroom property by extending into the attic, doing extension to the back or to the side or down into the basement, whatever. Now this works really well in expensive areas. If you're buying in the home counties or in London, to go and buy an existing HMO, it may not stack up. It may not give you the kind of cash flow and return on investment you're looking for. But buying a cheaper house, a smaller house, and doing the building work to turn it into an HMO does work very, very well. I have a lot of people in the home counties who are doing that, and also in London. So you buy a 3-bed house, turn it into a 5 or even a 6-bed HMO. And 6 beds really is the kind of magic number. Now, by increasing the value of the property, by doing some work to it and bringing the rents in, you can often refinance the property. You can remortgage it and pull out all of your money using a strategy we call momentum investing. So you basically buy at a good price, you convert the property, you then refinance it 6 months later, take out the deposit, all the costs, you can then go again and buy another one. What this means is you can rapidly build up the number of properties, and that's what all the case studies I showed you at the very beginning of this training do. That's how they built up such a big portfolio very, very quickly. The next thing you can do, so we talked about buying existing HMOs, we talked about buying a normal house, converting it into an HMO. You can also buy a commercial property and convert it into a purpose-built HMO. This works really well for commercial spaces such as offices that are vacant and no longer used as offices, pubs that are for sale, or space above shops. You could turn into purpose-built HMOs. Now, this can work really, really well, but there are extensive building works required, and this is probably not best for you if this is your first project. Buying an existing HMO is probably the easiest thing, and then converting is next easiest. And then commercial to HMO is probably the more advanced strategy, but again, it can be very, very profitable. Now, so far, we've talked about you buying properties, and the problem with that is, eventually you'll run out of your own deposit money. So what I want to talk about now is where you can JV or joint venture with other investors. You don't have to buy HMOs on your own. You could joint venture with another investor. So let's say you educate yourself, you learn what makes a good HMO, you get out there, you find some good HMOs, but you run out of money. There are plenty of people who come to property networking events or come to property seminars to learn about property, but they don't have the time or the knowledge or the inclination to actually do it themselves. And so they would love to joint venture with someone like you who knows what you're doing, who can find some great projects, and you do all the work. So you do the work, they put the money in, and it's a great way to work. Or maybe even you've got the money, but you don't know what to do. So you might basically find someone who does know what they're doing, and they've got the experience, and they found the deal, and they can help you on your next project. Now, just a word of caution here. You do need to be very careful who you work with. You need to check people out. You need to do your due diligence on the people. You need to check out the property, check out the deal. You've really got to get to know your JV partners because you are effectively entering into business with them. You'll set up a company. You'll both be shareholders and directors of that company. And, sometimes things go wrong in property, and you want to make sure you can work together and resolve those issues. So it's really important to do that. Now, so far we've talked about buying either on your own or doing a joint venture, but I'd like to get you thinking, well, do you even need to buy a property? Do you need to do that? Buying a property is going to involve putting a large deposit in, and you've got costs, plus you've got to get a mortgage, which might be difficult if you're a new investor. Now, there's one myth. I just want to bust a myth here. People sometimes think that you need to have a lot of experience, you need to be an experienced landlord to get an HMO license. There are some lenders, some mortgage companies who do want you to have at least one property to get an HMO mortgage. That is correct. However, right now, at time of filming this, there is at least one lender who will allow you to set up a brand new company with no background, with no property experience, and they will give you mortgages on HMO properties. You don't need to have an existing company, just set up a new one. You don't need to be an experienced landlord. You don't need to have any other property, and they'll lend to you on an HMO license. There are two conditions though. The one condition is you need to have a fairly good credit rating, a reasonable credit score, and you need to have an income. Now, again, another myth is people think you need to have a £25,000 plus income, and some lenders do require that to get a buy-to-let mortgage. But this one particular lender, they just need an income, something coming in on a regular basis, and they'll give you an HMO license even if you have no experience. So I just want to dispel that myth right now. But actually, you don't even need to buy the property. There are other strategies you can use where you don't need a mortgage and you don't need a large deposit. Let me explain these. And it's all about controlling a property instead of actually buying a property. So my question is, well, why buy a property, which means a deposit and a mortgage, when you could rent instead? So here's how this works. You find a tired landlord, someone who's fed up of running their property, or a retiring landlord who doesn't want to do it anymore. They want to go and sit on a beach, and you can take away the hassle from them. Basically, you give them a guaranteed rent every single month, and they've got no hassle, no work. You take care of everything for them. And basically, you rent out their room, their house on a room-by-room basis, and obviously, you need to be getting more rent than you are paying them. And the difference is your profit. You know, I mentioned that you could give your property to a company, to a charity. That's what they do. They take on properties, and because they can rent them to people who are vulnerable, they get a higher rent from the local council, and they can make a margin on the difference. So you could take your existing property, give them to companies or charities, or you could flip it and you can find other landlords who own property and you can take their property on. Now, this is known as rent to rent, or R to R. And this can be a great strategy to find out if you like HMOs without having to buy. I mean, imagine you understand about the strategy, you educate yourself, you then go and buy an HMO, spend that time and money doing it, and then realize, oh, I don't like HMOs. Well, you don't have to do that. Instead of buying, you could do rent to rent first. Make sure you like it, make some good money, then you can go and buy one. Now, there's another strategy which is similar to rent, but I believe better. It's called a purchase lease option. And I'm going to give you, by the way, I'm going to give you two case studies to help you kind of understand this, to get your head around this so you get it basically. But a purchase lease option is where, similar to rent, you give a guaranteed rental income to the owner and you get to use the property, rent it out, make a margin, but you also have the right to buy that property for a price that you agree today within an agreed time period. So you might get the right to buy a house within 3 or 5 years, and the price you agree today might be less than what it's worth in the future. So you can get cash flow as well as equity growth, which is fantastic. So to help you understand this, let me kind of put it into context and give you a bit of a case study here. So this is Seb and Aga. I showed you a picture of them earlier, originally from Poland. They came to the UK, didn't really know many people. They were both working, but they realized that actually working for a living kind of got in the way of their life. They wanted to travel, they wanted to have a young family, and they never had the time to do that because they were working. So they came and they did some training with me about HMOs, and this is one of their properties. In fact, this was their first rent-to-rent deal they did. So this is an 8-bed. Now, the great thing about an 8-bed, obviously, it needs to be licensed. You've got to have the change of use to planning. This was already set up as an HMO, and the landlord was struggling to rent out the rooms. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't educate himself, and so he wasn't picking very good tenants, and tenants were coming in and not staying long and leaving. There were lots of void periods. So the landlord was not making the kind of money he should make from this property because he didn't really know what he was doing. He didn't educate himself properly. So Seb and Aga found this point. One of the best ways of finding these kind of landlords is by writing to them. So you can go to the local council, you can get access to all the people who have got HMO licenses. You can send them a letter saying, hey, would you like to sell or rent your property? And some of those people will come back to you, and that's exactly what they had here. and it's in Southampton, and they agreed to pay the landlord £1,700 a month in rental income, and this was more than the landlord was getting. Now, one of the reasons he was struggling to rent it was it wasn't in great condition, so Seb and Aga had to spend a little bit of money painting the property, make it look better. They put some new furniture in. He had a lot of furniture that wasn't matching, didn't look great, so they replaced it all. They spent some money, nothing like the investment they'd make if they bought this property, but still there was some money to put in. And the net profit, so after taking off, to take the rent, less the fee to the landlord, less the cost for maintenance, less the bills, the net profit every single month is £2,088. As I said, when you have a large, like an 8-bed HMO, if you make a 6-bed should make you about £1,000. To put an extra 2 people in terms of the utility bills, it's not going to cost you that much more. But you might make an extra £1,000, and in this case, they make £2,088 every single month. That's £25,000 a year. Just imagine how many of these would you need to replace your income? And all Seb and Aga did our training, followed the step-by-step process, and they were able to find this property. And they got a contract for 3 years to get this rental income. At the end of 3 years, they give the property back to the owner. But actually, they've had all their money back. They put $11,600 in. They've had that back twice over. The return on investment is 216%. So the first 6 months, they got their money back. Then they made profit for the next 2.5 years. Now, very often landlords will extend the contract. They might take it back themselves. You need to get a number of these. And Seb and Aga, in 12 months, got enough to give them £74,000 a year of profit. They've now got well over £100,000 they're making. So this was using rent-to-rent, a great strategy. Next strategy I want to tell you about in the second large HMO case study is a purchase lease option. So this is a huge property. This is down in Plymouth, I think it is, and it's a large student property. It was in reasonable condition, but unfortunately it had a very bad letting agent who really wasn't advertising the property very well. So it only had a few of the rooms let, and in fact it was an 11-bed property split over 4 floors, so a really, really big HMO, but the letting agent was just doing a really bad job because they weren't really a specialist in this. So Sally and Kevin found this again through landlord letters, and the owner was delighted to be able to get a guaranteed rental for 5 years. And because they had such a headache with it, they didn't really want the property. So they agreed £2,000 a month. Now, interestingly, they were only getting in 1,330 at the time because only a few of the rooms were let out. So this situation is Kevin and Sally were able to pay the landlord more than they were earning before, because it wasn't let very well. So the landlord's making more money and he's got no hassle at all. And by making it look great, they were able to rent out the full property for £4,730. And basically, instead of trying to put students in, it wasn't the right kind of location. They repurposed it and put working tenants in because it was close to the city centre and also close to the railway station. Utilities, maintenance, all the bills, about £650 per month. So the net profit, again, just over £2,000 per month, or £24,000 a year on this one property. This is the property that Kevin and Sally don't own, but they've got the right to buy it in 5 years' time for £400,000. So the rental income of £4,730, that's a pretty good investment just to buy it, but they don't have to put the big £100,000 plus deposit in. They don't have to get a mortgage on it because they're just paying a monthly fee to the landlord now. It's a great solution for the landlords and a great solution for Kevin and Sally. So I do hope you've got a huge amount out of this on-demand training, this basic 101 quick start. First of all, we need to pick an area to invest in. And many people worry about this. I would say pick where you live, first of all. It's probably a great place to start. And what you need to do is to go onto the internet, go onto spareroom.co.uk and search to see if there's a demand in your area where you live. There probably is a demand where you live. You need to call the local council and get the HMO licensing pack to make sure you understand about all of the how many rooms require a license. Remember, it's generally 5 or more people it's going to require a license, but some councils say 3 or more people. So make sure you know what it is, and they'll give you all the forms, and they'll give you all the fire safety information as well. Now call the HMO, so now call the planning department. Remember, licensing and planning are completely separate, unrelated matters, and ask them if Article 4 in relation to HMOs is in operation in the town or city. If it is, ask what areas. There's probably got a map they could show you. You'll know where and when you can't buy. Do some research, check out the competition, see what other people are charging, check the standards, make sure you're providing property better than they are. And obviously do some research on which strategy might be best for you. Are you going to do straightforward purchases of existing HMOs? Are you going to convert houses into HMOs if you're in a more expensive area? Are you going to do commercial to HMO? Or are you going to do some of the strategies where you don't even need a deposit or a mortgage? Maybe such like rent to rent, where you take on someone else's house, or even purchase this option similar to rent, but you also get the long-term capital growth. Or maybe you're going to do a combination of all of these strategies. I do urge you to really go over this video again and make sure you've got the fundamentals. There's a lot more to learn, obviously, but I wanted to give you what you need, certainly to get going and really understand this strategy. If you'd like to learn more about profiting from HMOs, well, we've got lots of different training we do. We've got live events and we've got online training as well. My recommendation would obviously be to do the Ultimate HMO Home Study course. It's a 6-week online training program. You get access to the content forever. We just release some each week. It is currently closed, I'm afraid. We open up the enrollment usually twice a year because we like to bring everyone through the training at the same time so you can ask questions and get support. It's not just online doing it on your own. There's a support group with you. So we only do it about twice a year. It's currently closed. If you want to get onto the wait list, this is the link you need. You might want to write this down. It is case sensitive as well. Just to be very clear, it's case sensitive. So it's all lowercase apart from the letters HMO that are there. So it's http://bit.ly/HMO wait list. And this training, the 6-week module, teaches you everything you need. So what I've taught you today is just some of the content from the very first module of 6 modules. All you need to do is go and register your interest, and when we open that up again, we will let you know and you can decide if it's right for you or not. So thank you so much for watching this on-demand training. I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Thank you very much.